happy 4th of July weekend. It's the 14th week in the year. I'm going to use the middle reading for a change, and that is 2 Corinthians 12, 7 to 11. I'm also going to read a little bit from a chapter before that, 2 Corinthians 11, 22, and pretty much following. Question. Do you have a thorn in your flesh? That's what St. Paul talks about himself. A thorn in his flesh. Do you have one? Well, let's begin by looking at St. Paul, and I don't know if everybody would like this or understand this, but I think women have a harder time accepting St. Paul than men do. Is that true? Well, to make it even more crass, I think Paul was a very humble man. Really? Let's talk about that. The humility of Paul and the weakness of Paul. Humility. Sometimes it might seem like he's always bragging or boasting, or really a proud person of all his accomplishments. And for that, I went to that chapter before, 2 Corinthians 11, and I'd just like to read some of his boasting. But what anyone dares to boast of, I also dare. Are they Hebrews? So am I. Are they Israelites? So am I. Are they descendants of Abraham? So am I. Are they ministers of Christ? I am talking like an insane person. I am still more, with far greater labors, far more imprisonments, far worse beatings, and numerous brushes with dead. 5 times at the hands of the Jews I received 40 lashes minus 1. 3 times I was beaten with rods. Once I was stoned. 3 times I was shipwrecked. I passed a night and day on the deep, on frequent journeys, in danger from rivers, dangers from robbers, dangers from my own race, dangers from Gentiles, dangers in the city, dangers in the wilderness, dangers at sea, dangers among false brothers, in toil and hardship, through many sleepless nights, through hunger and thirst, through frequent fastings, through cold and exposure. And apart from these things, there is the daily pressure upon me of my anxiety for all the churches. Who is weak, and I am not weak? Who is led to sin, and I am not indignant? If I must boast, I will boast in the things that show my weakness. And that weakness is shown in that second reading. Well, he goes on, other things that women get upset as far as women should be subject to their husbands in everything. Women, you better wear head dress, covering on your head in the synagogues, etc. Any rate, I really do believe that many women, and many men too, have a hard time accepting the humility of Paul. Well, he did tell the truth. And humility really is truth. If he did all these things, and he said he did all those things, and he gave thanks to God for being able to do all those things, that's humility. Perhaps, though, the hardest thing to be humble is to admit our weakness, to admit our failures, to admit our sins. And Paul talks about he had a thorn in his flesh. In other words, he wasn't happy with himself, this darkness or this thorn in his flesh. And people, really, we don't know what that was. Have they project. Oh, it was stammering speech. It was acute arthritis. It was poor eyesight. Others, his looking at the world and seeing the attitude of the world, or the many messengers of Satan in the world, others say. And still others, maybe humorous, says he had a sexual problem. And even more humorous, others say it couldn't have been a sexual problem because everybody's got one of those. We don't know what the thorn in the flesh was with Paul. But in his prayer and in the communication of God to Paul, God says, my grace is sufficient. Live with this. My grace is sufficient. And then I ask myself, do I have a thorn in the flesh? Or I ask you, do you have a thorn in the flesh? After 50 years of hearing people's confessions, I find it often where people, they either stop confessing their sins, or when they continue to confess their sins, many say, Father, I say the same thing all the time. I just wondered if that is the thorn in your flesh. That we're creatures of habit. We are creatures with weakness, weak habits. And we do many things over and over again. Could that be a thorn in the flesh? I'll bet many of you women and men say the same thing over and over again, or experience your weakness, same weakness, over and over again. And I just wonder, is that something like Paul's thorn in the flesh? I'll tell you this much. Because you have a thorn in the flesh, my grace is sufficient, don't stop admitting it. Or even maybe don't even stop expecting I go to confession once or twice and I will become perfect. I will get rid of this. It doesn't happen that way, does it? Our weakness continues to show itself. But let me tell you this. The more often and the more sincere you and I are, and the more we come at the feet of Jesus and say, I'm sorry for my weakness, the more we will realize how much He loves us. And He still loves us, continues to love us, and continues to say, I forgive you. I love you. Even though you might have this thorn in the flesh. Do you have a thorn in your flesh? Have a good day.